Look at our cities. We walk on two legs, build global networks, and shape the planet to our will. It is easy to observe this modern dominance and assume humans were the intended final product of biology. But this visualization of the evolutionary tree reveals a brutal reality. Of all the species that have ever crawled, swam, or flown across this planet, 99% are gone. They are completely extinct. The fact that we are sitting here today defies the basic laws of probability. Biologically speaking, we are the 1%. We are the survivors of a 4 billion-year lottery. Our ancestors spent 4 billion years navigating a landscape of predatory threats and total planetary upheavals, surviving through improbable genetic coincidences. Because of that, every physical quirk of the human body, from the way we breathe to the massive volume of our brains, was forged in the fires of ancient trauma. We are built from the scars of our ancestors. Over 400 million years ago, our ancestors were small, vulnerable creatures swimming in a terrifying ocean. Relentless pressure from primeval monsters drove a rapid biological arms race, forcing our ancestors to develop physical armor, jaws, and teeth. Even with new defenses, the open water remained too lethal. Desperate to escape, our ancestors retreated into the shallows. But these stagnant swamps lacked a crucial resource, oxygen. They were suffocating. Starved of oxygen, the cells in their blood began to shut down. But a random genetic mutation provided a way out. A new internal organ formed, a primitive lung. Instead of relying entirely on gills to filter water, they could breach the surface and gulp raw air. Our gills are long gone, but the neurological wiring from that transition still remains inside us. Today, when that ancient breathing mechanism spasms, we experience it as a common hiccup. About 250 million years ago, a giant plume of magma surged up through the Earth's crust in Siberia. The ensuing volcanic winter trapped noxious carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, boiling the planet and wiping out 95% of all living species. A tiny handful of species hung on, but as the planet recovered, a new apex predator took control, the dinosaurs. Our mammalian ancestors couldn't compete. To survive, they were pushed into the shadows, living as tiny, rat-like creatures hiding in the underbrush. Escaping a dinosaur required extreme adaptations. We grew smaller, harder to catch, and learned to hunt at night. To survive the cool darkness, we evolved warm blood and insulating fur. Tiny muscles at the base of each hair would contract to trap heat, a reflex we still feel today as goosebumps. Operating in total darkness required more than just instinct. It required the ability to analyze a situation and respond. Over millions of generations, this constant sensory demand refined a new structure in the brain, the neocortex, giving us the power to outthink the monsters in the dark. The dinosaurs reigned for over 165 million years. That dominance ended 65 million years ago, when an asteroid slammed into the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact pulverized rock into dust, blocking the sun and triggering a global collapse. The mighty dinosaurs starved. But our tiny ancestors survived because they were small enough to burrow underground and feast on the insects that fed on the decaying world above. Millions of years after the dust settled, the survivors had moved into the dense canopies of the African forests. We had evolved into agile primates, perfectly adapted to a life of leaping through the trees. Then, the geology of the continent fractured. Deep underground, tectonic plates pulled apart, forming the massive East African Rift Valley. A sprawling mountain chain surged upward, creating a towering physical barrier that blocked the seasonal rains coming from the Indian Ocean. Without rain, the dense rainforests dried out and shattered into isolated patches of trees. Our ancestors were abruptly stranded in an open, sprawling savanna. The food didn't disappear, but getting to it now meant covering vast stretches of dangerous, exposed ground. As the forest canopy thinned, those who could move efficiently between patches of trees had a higher chance of survival. Over 1 million years, natural selection favored the mutations that allowed our ancestors to balance on two legs, making bipedalism a permanent way of life. Standing upright was not an elective choice. It was a mandatory biological adjustment to a dying environment that permanently warped our skeletal structure. As this 3D model shows, standing upright created a new mechanical problem. To support our vertical weight, the human pelvis had to become severely narrow. This tight skeletal bottleneck meant that for early humans, childbirth became incredibly dangerous. Biology found a costly workaround. To safely pass through the restricted birth canal, human babies had to be born prematurely, while their heads were still small. They arrived completely helpless. Because human infants require years of intense care, a single mother could no longer survive alone. This severe vulnerability forced our ancestors to band together, relying on extended families and social cooperation to keep their offspring alive. But bipedalism also offered a crucial advantage. With our feet doing the walking, our hands were finally free. We used them to break stones, crafting the first engineered tools for scavenging meat. Tools eventually led to the control of fire, and fire meant we could cook our meat. Cooking breaks down dense proteins, so we no longer needed massive jaw muscles or heavy digestive tracts. The heavy molars once used to grind raw food retreated into our gums, lingering today as our vestigial wisdom teeth. Digestion is metabolically expensive. By outsourcing the breakdown of food to fire, our ancestors lowered the energy demands of their digestive systems. Over countless generations, the calories saved from smaller guts and weaker jaw muscles fueled the steady, massive growth of the brain. This expanded cranial dome allowed for complex thought and intricate motor control. As our brains rewired, the anatomy of our throats shifted, giving us the physical ability to form distinct sounds, words, and eventually human speech. Humanity is the result of 4 billion years of continuous adaptation to disaster. We are the sum total of every ancestor who refused to go extinct, proving that survival is the ultimate shaper